Ah, what have we here? Another installment of the intellectual circus that is the Jordan Peterson podcast, this time featuring none other than Brett Weinstein, an evolutionary biologist who seems to have taken a wrong turn on the way to the laboratory and ended up in the pseudo-intellectual wasteland of Peterson's mind. Episode 434, ladies and gentlemen, titled The Darien Gap and Postmodernism, promises to be a veritable feast of logical fallacies, misrepresentations of scientific concepts, and self-aggrandizing nonsense. From the very beginning, it becomes clear that we are in for a bumpy ride. Peterson, ever the master of the verbose and the vacuous, launches into a meandering diatribe about the Darien Gap, a stretch of wilderness between Panama and Colombia, and its supposed significance for understanding the crisis of Western civilization. Never mind that the connection between these two things is tenuous at best. In Peterson's world, everything is a symbol, a metaphor, a sign of some deeper truth that only he is privy to. But the real travesty begins when Weinstein, who should know better, starts to engage with Peterson's ideas as if they had any merit. As an evolutionary biologist, Weinstein is surely aware of the dangers of teleological thinking, of ascribing purpose and direction to the blind processes of evolution. And yet here he is, nodding along as Peterson spins a tale of how the principles of Darwinian selection can be applied to human societies, as if culture and biology were interchangeable. It is a classic example of the fallacy of reductionism, of attempting to explain complex phenomena by breaking them down into simpler, more easily digestible parts. But human society is not a petri dish, and the forces that shape it cannot be reduced to a set of simple, deterministic laws. To suggest otherwise is not only intellectually dishonest but also deeply dangerous, as it provides a veneer of scientific legitimacy to what are essentially just-so stories, untested hypotheses that are passed off as fact. And speaking of untested hypotheses, let us turn our attention to the central conceit of this podcast. The idea that postmodernism and neo-Marxism are the root causes of the decline of Western civilization. This is a favorite hobby horse of Peterson's, and one that he trots out at every opportunity, regardless of its relevance to the topic at hand. In this case, he and Weinstein spend a good chunk of the episode railing against the evils of relativism and the dangers of abandoning objective truth in favor of subjective experience. But as with so much of what Peterson says, this is a gross oversimplification of a complex set of ideas. Postmodernism, at its core, is not about denying the existence of truth, but rather about recognizing the ways in which our understanding of truth is shaped by our social, cultural, and historical context. It is a call for humility, for recognizing the limits of our knowledge, and the ways in which our biases and assumptions can distort our perception of reality. But such nuance is lost on Peterson and Weinstein, who prefer to paint postmodernism as a boogeyman, a corrupting force that is eating away at the foundations of Western society. They speak of the need to defend Western values against the onslaught of relativism and nihilism, as if these values were some kind of sacred cow that must be protected at all costs. But what are these values exactly? And who gets to define them? These are questions that Peterson and Weinstein never bother to ask, let alone answer. Instead, they retreat into a kind of intellectual obscurantism, throwing around big words and abstract concepts as if they were incantations, magical spells that can ward off the demons of uncertainty and doubt. They speak of reciprocal altruism and the Pareto distribution as if these were some kind of secret knowledge, keys to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. But in reality, they are just using the language of science to dress up what are essentially just personal opinions, unsubstantiated assertions that have no basis in empirical evidence. And this, ultimately, is the greatest sin of the Jordan Peterson podcast. Its pretense to intellectual depth and profundity, its claim to be offering some kind of deep insight into the human condition. But scratch beneath the surface and what you find is a hollow core of pseudo-philosophy and self-help platitudes, a collection of half-baked ideas and unexamined assumptions that crumble under the slightest scrutiny. It is a shameful display, a mockery of the very idea of intellectual discourse. And the fact that it is being enabled and legitimized by someone like Brett Weinstein, who should know better, is a testament to the sorry state of our public discourse. When even our scientists and educators are willing to abandon their critical faculties in the face of a charismatic charlatan like Peterson, what hope is there for the rest of us? But perhaps I am being too harsh. After all, it is easy to criticize from the sidelines, to point out the flaws and failings of others while offering nothing constructive in return. And in fairness to Peterson and Weinstein, they are at least attempting to grapple with some of the big questions of our time, even if they are doing so in a misguided, confused, and counterproductive way. No, I take that back. There is no excuse for this kind of intellectual malpractice, no justification for the spreading of falsehoods and the muddying of waters. As someone who has dedicated his life to the pursuit of truth and the defense of reason, I cannot stand idly by while charlatans like Peterson and Weinstein are given free rein to pollute the public discourse with their nonsense. So let us gird our loins and sharpen our wits, and let us go forth into battle against the forces of irrationality and obscurantism. And let us never forget the words of the great philosopher Bertrand Russell. The fundamental cause of the trouble is that in the modern world the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt. Let us prove him wrong, and let us show the world that reason and truth will always triumph in the end.